I've had a lot of tutors lately, tutees, that have been having a whole problem issue with the foreign exchange. Sometimes about the real interest rate, sometimes about just sort of the way the book teaches it or the teacher teaches it. It's not making a lot of sense. So let's you and I sort of just go through a little bit of how I think about the foreign exchange, and we'll talk about how to answer some of these questions. These are all real interest rate questions from past exams having to do with a foreign exchange. So the way I think about the Forex is I have two countries, let's say the US and Japan, and we need to know how to draw the graph. We need to know which way money flows. Obviously, the real interest rate gives us some of that information, but let's just do a basic sort of understanding of the foreign exchange. The way I tend to start with students is if the US buys stuff from Japan, the US citizens have to pay Japanese with yen. The Japanese don't accept American dollars. So they have to take their US citizens who are buying this stuff have to take their dollars and dump it into the Forex, and then they're going to buy Japanese yen to pay for the stuff that they bought. So understand here that we have to draw this graph to make sense of what's happening to the value. It is just a supply and demand of American dollars in the Forex. So as these US citizens take their dollars and dump them into the Forex to buy yen, the supply of American dollars increases. This obviously is going to cause the value to go down. More dollars in the Forex drives down the value of each additional dollar. At the same time, on the other side, when U.S. citizens are dumping their dollars into the Forex, they're buying more yen. So the demand for yen is increasing. This is driving the value of the yen up. Now, we could say the value increases. We could say this a couple different ways. We could say it appreciates. We could say it gets stronger. All of these are saying the same thing. Over here, we know that the value of the US dollar is going down. We could say that it's depreciating. We could say that it's getting weaker. A couple things we need to know that will help in the long run for doing these is that if your currency is getting weaker, we know your exports are going to go up. We know your imports are going to go down. And this should make sense, right? As your currency is weaker, Japanese can buy American goods look relatively less expensive because they actually have to give up less yen to buy $1. So the relative price of American goods as American dollars are getting weaker, or the value is going down, or it's depreciating, it becomes a better buy for Japanese. So our exports in the U.S. would go up, but obviously our imports, everything else with a weaker dollar, would look more expensive to us. Do know how to do the axes on this. So it's just American dollars on the vertical, quantity of American dollars here, and then we could do something like yen to dollar. This not only implies that the value of the US dollar is getting weaker, but also that it takes less yen to buy one US dollar. So we could just do E1 here, E2. Obviously here we would do yen on the vertical, quantity of yen on the horizontal, and then it is American dollars to yen. This implies that, again, as the demand for yen goes up, the value is going up, it's appreciating, it's getting stronger. It also implies that it takes more American dollars. The price of American dollars per yen is going up, meaning it takes more American dollars to buy 1 yen. So that's sort of your basic understanding of foreign exchange. If you can understand which way the money's flowing, always concentrate on what's going on inside the Forex. I kind of call it the Forex in the sky. Then you can pretty much answer a whole bunch, I'd say 80% of all of these questions that the College Board gives you. All right, let's talk about these individual problems. So I just wanted to give you a quick introduction to how I do foreign exchange. Now I'm going to get rid of this, and we're going to talk about some of this same stuff here. But we're going to do it with some actual AP questions. So let's read them and see if we can make sense of them. Knowing what we know right now, I'm going to get rid of our dollars and our yen here because we don't want that to influence us. And, oops, there we go. Oops, I did it there. All right. We're good. Oh, let's get rid of the stuff too. We're not buying any stuff right now. So the U.S., Japan, we don't know which way the dollar's going. So we're good. We're back to normal. Now, let's say if the real interest rate in the U.S. increases relative to that of the rest of the world, capital will flow in which direction? So what we know here is that the real interest rate goes up in the U.S. That implies that it relatively has to imply that the Japanese real interest rate would go down. Think about that again. Even if they both started out at 5%, and then the real interest rate in the U.S. goes up to 7%, that implies that the Japanese rate, even if it hasn't changed, must be lower. So we just kind of show it as if the real interest rate in the U.S. goes up, relatively the Japanese real interest rate must be lower. I hope that makes sense. So let's get rid of these. We know the real interest rate in the U.S. is going up. Obviously, Japanese now look over here at the U.S., and this is the only place in our curriculum where we're talking about putting money in the banks to get that high real interest rate. All through our course, all the way up until now, we always think of money taking loans out and taking money out of the banks, and therefore low interest rates are best. But in this situation with capital flows, whoever has the higher real interest rate would attract dollars from around the world because Japanese want to put their money in U.S. banks and get profit off of that high real interest rate. So Japanese in this situation would take their yen. They're going to drop their yen into the FOREX. They're going to buy now. U.S. banks only take American dollars. They're going to take that Japanese yen. They're going to buy U.S. dollars. And they're going to put those U.S. dollars into U.S. banks. Now, this implies a couple of things of happening. Let's just talk about it. Obviously, when these Japanese are dumping their yen into the FOREX to exchange it to dollars, well, we know the supply of yen going into the FOREX is increasing, and that's going to drive the value of the yen down. At the same time, they're buying American dollars, so the demand for American dollars is increasing, driving the value up. We can see there's going to be an outflow of capital from Japan and an inflow of capital into the U.S. So if the real interest rate in the U.S. increases relative to that of the rest of the world, capital should flow into the U.S. I like it, but the dollar will not depreciate. I like B. We've already figured that out, right? As the demand for dollars is increasing, it's got to drive up the value of the dollar. So it's got to be appreciating. Capital is flowing in, the value is appreciating. All right, let's back this up just a little bit, and then let's do this one here, see if we can make sense of it. I'm going to get rid of all of this. Don't want us to lead the witness. Oops. And we'll do it again. I don't know anything about rates yet. Okay. Assume the supply of loanable funds. Now, tricky, I don't tend to like to teach loanable funds while I'm teaching the foreign exchange. I tend to separate them very, very carefully because loanable funds is, we think of loanable funds as what we could just say is money in the banks. This has not much to do with it. We keep it separate from the idea of our loanable funds. I don't like this color. Give me a second. Can I get it? Oh, well. Assume that the supply of loanable funds increases in country X. What's going to happen to the international value of X's currency, exports, yada, yada. So this is sort of limited here. Let's just draw a quick loanable funds graph just so we know what they look like. Supply of loanable funds, demand for loanable funds, real interest rate on the vertical. Now we're saying the supply of loanable funds increases. That's going to shift to the right. That's obviously going to make the real interest rate go down. So now we know, and let's just say let's just say this is country X here. We know the real interest rate is going to go down. That implies that the real interest rate in other countries have to be going up. We know that country X, or the US here, is going to dump their currency. I'm just going to use dollars because it's easier. Into the FOREX, they're going to buy Japanese yen, right? So what we tend to know is the value of X, or the US there, as they dump their dollars into the FOREX to get that higher real interest rate, as they put their monies into Japanese banks, that the supply of dollars here is going into the FOREX. Therefore, the value of the dollar has to be decreasing, or the value of X's currency is decreasing. Let's get rid of the rest of these. In essence, X's currency is depreciating. It's getting weaker. The value, as we say, is going down. This makes it a better buy for other countries, right? They can buy our goods cheaper because our dollars are less. So we would say exports would increase as the value of the currency goes down. We talked about that in the beginning. It's important to know it because there's enough of these exports and import questions that we just have to know. So let's try another one. Let's jump to 27 down here and see if we can answer them. Easy enough. I'm going to, again, get rid of our stuff here. Now, when I'm tutoring guys, I tend to be able, we can clearly do a very strong understanding of the foreign exchange in about 30 minutes. But obviously, there's a lot of stuff that changes with the foreign exchange. So we really have to sort of understand what happens to the price level, how to read these questions to make sense of them. It takes a lot longer and a little bit of work to make sure that we can read them and know how the College Board is asking these questions and what they're looking for. So let's do it again. If the real interest rate in X increases, let's say this is X, let's say this is Y. We know the real interest rate in X is going up while the real interest rate in Y is relatively going down. There are no trade barriers. Then for country X, which of the following will be true if its capital flow, the value of its currency, and its exports? Well, capital flow is easy, right? We know the ones with the highest real interest rate are going to have money flow to them. So let's just say yen is going to flow out of Japan. It's going to flow into the U.S. They're going to buy U.S. dollars. That implies that the demand for dollars, think about this again. Now, the Y or Japan want to put their money into U.S. or X's banks. So they're going to take their currency out of Japan, change it in the FOREX. They're going to buy more dollars, and they're going to put those into U.S. banks. So the demand for dollars is increasing, which implies the value has to be going up. So we know there's an inflow of capital into the U.S. That's easy. Let's get rid of, let's just get rid of the outflows here. We also know our currency is appreciating, so we can get rid of the depreciation. We know when our currency appreciates that exports go down. You just need to put that in your brain. We can make sense of it talking about it, but it's an easy thing to remember. Your currency is stronger. That implies it's going to take less of Y or more of Y or Japan's currency to buy one American or one X dollar. Therefore, as our dollar is stronger, our exports are going to go down. People aren't going to buy stuff as much. So it's got to be inflow, appreciation, decrease. Nicely done. All right, 55. Let's back this up. Get rid of some of this again. All right. If the real interest rate, oh, what a surprise. If the real interest rate in the U.S. rises relative to other countries, what will happen to the value of the U.S. dollar and the United States net exports? Again, same kind of question, right? So we just tend to have to know it. We know Japanese are going to take their yen. They've got a low real interest rate. They want to put their currency into U.S. banks. So they're going to take their yen, dump it into the Forex. That means the supply of yen in the Forex is going to increase, driving down the value. At the same time, they want to put their money in U.S. banks to get that high real interest rate, so they're going to buy U.S. dollars, and that implies that the demand for U.S. dollars has to be increasing. Therefore, the value of the U.S. dollar has to be increasing. So the value of the U.S. dollar is appreciating. We can get rid of the depreciates. Obviously, a stronger dollar, again, exports have to go down. We should just know it. All right, decrease in exports. Obviously, they ask it a bit. Let's do the next one here, and then we'll be all done with this. So give me a second. Let me get rid of this. Okay. In an open economy, an increase in government budget deficits tends to cause the international value of the currency and its trade deficit to change in which of the following ways. Now, this is a tricky question. When they talk about budget deficits, we should know from doing fiscal policy that when government spending is greater than tax revenue, think about that for a second. When the government spends more than they take in taxes, we're going to have what we call a deficit, right? If government spending was less than tax revenue, we would have what we call a surplus. We know an increase in government budget deficits implies that the government is spending more. We should know from crowding out that when the government is spending more, it's driving up the real interest rate. This is a shortcut. Knowing that anytime the government is spending, it's driving up the real interest rate will save you a lot of time and effort on a lot of problems. There's a crowding out cheat sheet or a fiscal policy that has crowding out on it at my blog. Take a look, see if you can figure that out. You should know it by now. By the time you're getting to Forex, you better know it, right? So as the government spending increases, we know what they're saying is the real interest rate is going to go up. So let's just say the real interest rate goes up here, implies that the real interest rate in Japan would now go down. We know that, again, same scenario, Japanese want to put their money in where the real interest rates are highest. So they're going to take their yen, dump them into the Forex. That implies that the supply of yen is going to increase. It's going to drive down the value. At the same time, they want to put their money into U.S. banks. They've got to buy U.S. dollars to put that currency in there. So it's going to make the demand for U.S. dollars go up. Now we know that the U.S. dollar, and anytime you know one is depreciating, you know the other one has to be appreciating. So the value of the currency is definitely appreciating. But then they kind of trick us around here and they say, well, what's going to happen to the trade deficit? Now, to understand that, you have to know that a trade deficit, tricky. A trade deficit is when your exports are less than your imports. So think about this. If the value of our currency is going up, what we know is our exports are going to have to go down. Wouldn't that imply that if exports go down here, we have more of a deficit than we did before? Our exports are even lower than they were compared to our imports. So our deficit, in this situation, our deficit would have to become larger because we have less exports. I hope that makes sense. A bit tricky to get all that into your brain and make sense of it. So again, a trade deficit is anytime exports are less than imports. If the value of our currency increases, we would have even less exports. So that would make our deficit go up a little bit higher. Tricky. All right, my friends, take care, be safe, and see you soon. Hope that helps. Bye.